Back in the 1990s, I sat across from the CEO of a prominent Western firm who was doing something that seemed, on the surface, completely delusional. His company was drowning. They were in such deep financial ruin that they couldn't even pay their current staff on time yet. Yet he was spending a fortune on recruitment ads to hire even more people. When I asked him why he was inviting more passengers onto a sinking ship, he didn't talk about growth or recovery. He looked at me and explained that he wasn't trying to sell the substance of his company. He was selling the form. He needed the office to look crowded and busy so he could lure in a partner to buy into the facade. It was brilliant, albeit, completely cynical, a performance. He had bypassed all the grand philosophical theories of the classroom and tapped into the rawest nerves of the modern world. The idea that if you look the part, you are the part. To him, modernization was just a hollow buzzword, a shimmering coat of paint used to hide a collapsing interior. But as I began to look beyond that boardroom, I realized this wasn't just a corporate tactic. It's the exact blueprint currently being used to reshape the Islamic world. We are constantly invited into elite salons and intellectual platforms where modernization is presented as this inevitable, peaceful evolution. We're told by figures like Thomas Friedman that the world is flat, that if we just surrender our obsession with land, identity, and history, we can finally join a borderless, harmonious global market. It sounds like progress, doesn't it? A seat at the table in exchange for our baggage. However, there is a much colder reality lurking behind those polished slogans. While the world is sold as flat to us, the architects of this system know it is actually round, and often quite jagged. Beneath the surface, this brand of modernization isn't a gift. It's a high-stakes game of Darwinian survival, where the fit write the rules and everyone else is reduced to a wallet to be emptied. We are being ushered into a black box of digital and economic chaos where our identity is viewed as a thread to be crushed. That sudden realization that the modernity we are being offered is a mask for a very old kind of aggression left me wondering. Are we actually progressing? Or are we just the delivery drivers being auditioned for a movie where our faces will eventually be blurred out? This form over substance trap is the most dangerous deception facing the Muslim world today. And once you see the cards for what they are, you realize the game is rigged.
That opening anecdote, the CEO selling the illusion of prosperity, it's the perfect chilling lens through which to view our contemporary financial systems.
Right.
It's not just about isolated fraud. What you witnessed, that was the embodiment of systemic deception. The corporate form, that aggressive facade, it's intentionally used across the economy to mask underlying, even catastrophic insolvency.
Okay, let's unpack this. If the form is the lie, what does that look like when it's scaled up? I recently encountered the story of a man, Arthur, a senior executive at a supposed unicorn fintech firm in London.
Ah, a unicorn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
From the outside, you'd see aggressive advertising, glass walls, endless rounds of seed funding, and you'd just assume boundless success. But Arthur knew the truth. The company was functionally insolvent.
Functionally insolvent. So not just having a bad quarter.
No, not at all. It was a hollow shell, propped up entirely by the expectation of future debt.
And what's so disturbing about that experience is that his job, Arthur's job, was, it was completely detached from any productive substance. He wasn't optimizing the product or serving clients. He was just maintaining the illusion of expansion for creditors and, potential new investors.
He was manufacturing perception.
That's it, exactly. He spent his days leading these aggressive, hollow recruitment campaigns, interviewing bright, hopeful job applicants for positions he knew would never materialize, or if they did, the company would probably collapse before their probationary period even ended.
So Arthur was literally tasked with participating in this theater of growth. He wasn't manufacturing anything physical. He was manufacturing enthusiasm.
Precisely. And he viewed his role in, purely cynical terms. He called himself a Darwinian predator.
Wow.
Yeah. He felt he was consuming real human value, the time, the hope, the enthusiasm, the potential of those job applicants, just to buy his failing firm one more financial quarter of perceived legitimacy. He described it as cannibalizing the real world to feed a corporate ghost.
That's such a stark assessment of the consequence when a financial system operates in a post-fiat economy, just collapsing under its own abstractions.
It is.
You strip away tangible, real-world, value human efforts, time, hope to sustain an apparatus that has zero productive capacity left. The corporate form, those glass walls and aggressive job ads, it stops being a sign of success and becomes a calculated means of calculated ruin, just extending the charade until a greater fool buys in or the whole structure collapses.
And this calculated ruin, it requires a structure. To sustain insolvency while projecting expansion, companies have to become masters of debt camouflage. And this is where we look back at the origins of modern financial structural deception, the Enron blueprint.
Before we move on from Arthur, I just want to clarify something. The sheer scale of that lie spending money you don't have to hire people you can't pay just to look busy, it reveals that the market actively rewards the performance of growth more than actual growth.
It does. And the Enron playbook demonstrates how this form over substance dynamic can be weaponized at a massive institutional level. The goal, and this was explicitly stated in their internal memos, was simple: to generate cash without increasing debt load.
So they needed a mechanism to get billions in funding that looked like revenue, not liability. They used these complex transactions called a prepay. How do they weaponize something that, in basic concept is a simple, legitimate business tool?
Well, a standard prepay is simple, right? I pay you in advance for a product or a service you'll deliver later. Enron and its banking partners, and we're talking about titans like Chase Manhattan, now part of JP Morgan Chase and Citigroup, they took this tool and constructed these complex, phony versions.
Phony, yeah.
Instead of reporting these transactions as commercial financing, which is what they were, Enron reported them as energy trading activity or deferred revenue.
So these were essentially undisclosed loans, but they were masked as core business activities.
That's the core structural deception right there. It allowed Enron to secure approximately $8 billion in financing over about 6 years. And you have to ask, why was this masking so critical?
Because of the form versus substance equation.
Exactly. Increased business activity revenue from trading that boosts a company's stock value, and critically, its credit rating. The form looks robust. If they had disclosed the financing as debt, their credit rating would have plummeted, signaling instability and, well, exposing the collapsing substance.
And the banks knew this game was being played, which leads to the question of intentional complicity. Why would these huge financial institutions participate in this structural deception?
Oh, they were deeply embedded accomplices. Internal documents confirmed the goal was to, and I quote, hide funded debt from their equity analysts. The banks were making huge fees on these highly complex transactions, and their relationship with Enron was incredibly profitable.
So they were selling complexity as a service.
That's it. And that complexity was the armor hiding the truth. This was not a victimless crime perpetrated by Enron alone. It was a collaborative racket involving the core pillars of Western finance and accounting.
And to make the debt truly opaque, they used these complex offshore shell structures, right?
Yes. The deception involved a Baroque network of offshore shell companies, entities with names like Mahonia and Delta Energy that existed solely on paper in secrecy jurisdictions like the Cayman Islands.
No employees, no offices.
Nothing. They just served as conduits for the loans, ensuring the transactions remained far outside the purview of public disclosure. It made it nearly impossible for regulators or public investors to uncover the true relationship between the company, the banks, and the vast amount of hidden debt. When Enron finally filed for bankruptcy in December 2001, it had about $5 billion in prepays that were virtually unknown to investors.
That complexity was the intentional barrier to truth, and it led directly to that massive collapse and the loss of billions in shareholder and pension funds. But if we connect this structural deception to the bigger picture, it explains how the system remains afloat despite the sheer volume of unproductive debt. We have to talk about junk bonds and the rise of zombie companies.
This debt management extends far beyond one spectacular fraud. It defines our entire financial architecture. Junk bonds, or high-yield debt, are bonds rated below investment grade.
Which means they carry a much higher risk of default.
A much higher risk, yes. Investors tolerate this risk because the bonds offer a higher yield.
And how significant is that risk, really?
Historically, the default rate in the U.S. high-yield sector averages around 5%. But during periods of stress, like the 2007-09 crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic, that rate has spiked dramatically. It can get close to 9%.
And yet these things are widely traded.
Oh, widely. Often by large institutional investors like pension and mutual funds who are chasing yield in this perpetually low-interest environment.
And the existence of this accessible, high-risk debt sustains the most alarming metaphor of our time: the zombie company.
The metaphor is perfectly vivid because it describes the walking dead of the corporate world. A zombie company is an indebted business that, after covering its running costs and fixed costs like wages and rent, only generates enough cash to service the interest on its loans.
Not the principal.
Never the principal. They are not profitable enough to pay down their obligations, but they're not dead enough to be liquidated. They exist in the state of perpetual dependence on debt refinancing.
That sounds like a massive drag on economic vitality. I mean, if these companies are just sucking up capital without generating true returns, how do they persist?
They persist precisely because of the broader financial architecture. Central banks, especially after the 2008 crisis, adopted policies like near-zero interest rates and quantitative easing. This made it cheaper and easier for zombie companies to just perpetually refinance their debt, avoiding liquidation.
So instead of creative destruction, letting inefficient firms fail.
We incentivized the walking dead to consume resources and block healthier competition. Back in 2016, China even had to officially recognize the problem of zombie enterprises in industrial sectors like steel and coal because of gross overproduction problems. It led to massive planned redundancies.
So we have a system where the form low interest rates, easy credit sustains the substance, which is financial non-viability. But the risk doesn't stop with the zombie companies themselves, it spreads. This is where the concept of toxic debt comes in, right? The bundling of these dubious assets.
This is the critical step in systemic risk creation. High-yield bonds and other risky debt, like subprime mortgages, are packaged into complex financial instruments called collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs.
Okay, this is where we need a clear explanation. How does bundling bad debt make it look safe?
Well, think of it like taking a collection of individually questionable financial ingredients, bad loans, shaky mortgages, zombie company debt, and creating a complex financial fruit salad. You divide the salad into layers or tranches. The most junior tranches, they absorb the first losses. But the senior tranches, the ones highest up the priority list for repayment, are deemed incredibly safe. They often achieve high credit ratings, sometimes even AAA.
So by slicing and structuring the risk, the top layers are insulated enough to receive high credit ratings, even though the underlying assets are, well, rotten.
Precisely. This structural magic allows large, risk-averse institutional investors like pension funds and endowments, who often have strict regulations prohibiting them from buying low-grade debt, to purchase tranches of debt of, frankly, dubious value. This highly rated, complex paper is what becomes known as toxic debt.
And the systemic danger is realized when the underlying assets fail, as the subprime mortgages did in 2007-09.
When that failure occurs, these complex, opaque derivatives lose liquidity, and their true value becomes nearly impossible for auditors or accountants to determine. This toxic debt became systemically dangerous, leading to the collapse of giants like Lehman Brothers and ensuring the financial world became obsessed with the too-big-to-fail principle.
So the financial substance has been collapsing, replaced by highly structured, opaque risk.
And that condition requires something massive to hold the facade together, not economic ingenuity, but a powerful ideology to sustain the external form of global progress and stability.
Right. When the numbers themselves stop making sense, you need a story. That collapsing substance demands a powerful ideological camouflage, which we see in the promotion of the flat world hypothesis. They offer to trade away our history, our identity, and our connection to the physical earth in exchange for a seat at the table in the borderless, harmonious global market. This is the core appeal of the neoliberal ideal.
The neoliberal ideal is the foundational doctrine supporting this whole globalized system. It insists that social good is maximized by maximizing market transactions, promoting free trade, deregulation, and the supremacy of the market over the state.
But the central critique, and this provides the context for the financial desperation we were just talking about, is that neoliberalism's key achievement hasn't been universal prosperity. It's been a massive, engineered wealth redistribution.
A reverse Robin Hood strategy, moving wealth from the poor and the middle classes toward the oligarchic rich.
And this wealth accumulation creates a paradox. A crisis of surplus capital. There's too much money concentrated at the top, but a lack of genuinely profitable places to invest it in the real productive economy.
That leads directly to the geopolitical crisis of cheap nature. We are living through what some analysts call the Great Implosion and the epochal crisis of capitalism. The capital accumulation model that's been operational for the past 5 centuries is fundamentally breaking down.
Why?
Because the great frontier of cheap nature is finally exhausted.
What exactly do you mean by the great frontier of cheap nature?
Historically, systemic crises, when profits dropped and social conflicts rose, were resolved not through internal restructuring, but by finding new frontiers to exploit. These frontiers provided what they called the four cheaps: cheap labor, cheap food, cheap energy, and cheap raw materials.
Like the enclosure of land or the discovery of vast new oil reserves.
Exactly. Every expansion of the system relied on appropriating a new frontier of unpaid work or undervalued resources. But since the 1970s, the frontiers have been enclosed and exhausted. We've reached peak resource consumption, labor markets are globally interconnected but saturated, and the environment is resisting further extraction with climate change and ecological collapse.
So capitalism is running out of unpaid work and resources to appropriate at a price that guarantees high profit rates.
That's the core of it. And so if the system is running out of cheap nature, the result is this crisis of surplus capital money chasing fewer and fewer profitable opportunities, which manifests as hyperfinancialization and increasing geopolitical conflict, militarized accumulation, dirty wars.
And this impending systemic failure demands a political response from the ruling elites, the transnational capitalist class, or TCC. Their proposed solution is what we hear discussed in the halls of global governance, often branded as the Davos Project or the Great Reset.
Right.
So what's the core mandate of the Davos Project, if you strip away all the rhetoric of sustainability and stakeholder capitalism?
It is the political resolution to this twin crisis of profit-making and life-making. Boiled down, the Davos Project is the ruling elite using political power to guarantee their profit, transforming oligarchs into a ruling class that dictates global production and resource allocation.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, the cocktail they're mixing is comprehensive. It includes green, techno-authoritarian control, totalizing digital surveillance, the relentless financialization of everything, and regime change imperialism to secure the final pockets of resistance.
So it sounds like a move away from the free market ideal and toward the system where political power, administered by a transnational state apparatus, dictates economic outcomes.
That's the key shift. It's a tributary way out, where the primary goal isn't generating market competition, but using political influence and technological systems to guarantee the accumulation of socio-ecological wealth. It's fundamentally an aggressive top-down attempt to restructure global capitalism under the firm control of the oligarchy.
And the ideology underpinning this entire project requires the acceptance of the world as flat, a space devoid of inconvenient realities like cultural or land-based identity. This is where the human stories collide violently with that grand geopolitical plan.
That collision is perfectly illustrated by the story of Elena, an ancestral vineyard owner. She found herself classified on a global consortium's ledger as a Tier 3 development node.
The development node. Her land, which represented 5 generations of family history, was just a logistical component on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. The consortium, seeing the world as this flat, interchangeable surface, offered Elena a massive payout to convert her vineyard into a carbon offset forest, managed entirely by AI-powered drones. Her centuries-old relationship with the soil was being reduced to an equation in a global carbon market.
But she refused.
And her refusal became this profound act of resistance against the flat world hypothesis. She spoke of the memory of the soil, asserting that her identity, her family history, her culture, it was all rooted in the literal earth, in the physical place she inhabited. Her place was not a digital footprint or a fungible asset. It was her sovereignty.
This illustrates precisely how the flat world hypothesis functions. It's a technocratic tool for erasing local, land-based identity. Place is defined as an obstacle, a source of conflict, an inefficiency that must be managed, monetized, or repurposed for the global grid.
And for geopolitical actors, especially in the Islamic world, the implicit condition for joining this desired modernity is the surrender of that obsession with land and local history. You must relinquish your sense of rootedness to be accepted into the global technocracy.
It's an aggressive framework.
It reduces certain peoples and the natural environment to the status of nature, something to be dominated and extracted from. It's a continuation of the civilizing project that aims to devalue and dispossess those who stand in the way of global capital accumulation.
And to reinforce this necessity for global integration, to mask the system's underlying collapse, the elites offer this gleaming, intoxicating promise of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or 4IR.
The ultimate shimmering coat of paint.
Exactly.
The 4IR narrative, which is aggressively promoted by organizations like the World Economic Forum, is a key ideological pillar of the Davos Project. The claims are sweeping. We are witnessing an unprecedented exponential acceleration and convergence of technologies like AI, robotics, the Internet of Things, and personalized medicine.
They position it as a total historical transformation, equating it in importance to the introduction of electricity or the steam engine. They present it as the inevitable future that we must adapt to immediately.
But when you perform a rigorous historical and technical analysis, the core claim, it just falls apart. According to criteria that define true industrial revolutions, like the total transformation of social relations, labor processes, the global economy, there is no such phenomenon as a new industrial revolution.
So you're saying this is a continuation, not a revolution?
Yeah. Precisely. The technologies they list, AI, machine learning, robotics, they aren't fundamentally new inventions of the last decade.
Right.
They're sophisticated evolutionary advancements of the third industrial revolution, the 3IR, which started back in the 1960s with semiconductors, telecommunications, and mainframe computing. AI research began in the 1950s. The first industrial robot was deployed in 1961. Machine learning concepts trace back to the 50s and 80s. The enabling technologies for the IoT, the internet, and analog digital conversion were established in the 1960s.
So the narrative of the 4IR, then, is a political function. It's rebranding old infrastructure to serve a new agenda.
That's its primary function. The 4IR narrative obscures the relentless and ongoing problems of the 3IR. We have a structural crisis of subemployment globally, where middle-class jobs are hollowed out by automation and offshoring, forcing people into precarious service sector employment.
So you have more people working but not earning a living wage.
Exactly. By 2019, 61% of globally employed people were working informally, meaning they were technically employed but still living in poverty.
So they're replacing a crisis-ridden reality with a radiant future narrative that suggests exponential speed will solve all the 3IR's lingering problems, like joblessness and inequality.
It's the ultimate form over substance play in the ideological realm. The rhetoric of unprecedented convergence is intended to justify the new Darwinian reality promoted by the Davos Project, that the only people who will survive the current systemic implosion are those who master the means and ways of the 4IR. It's an ideological frame that favors the ruling elites by shifting the focus from social and political failings to technological inevitability.
If the old economic system is imploding, they have to invent a new one that looks exponentially faster and more advanced, even if the foundational technologies are still rooted in the 1960s.
That's it.
So if that is the ideological camouflage and the financial substance is collapsing, then the final target of this structural deception is human agency itself. We are being funneled directly into the digital black box.
The shift from a hollowed-out physical economy to an automated informational one requires the establishment of what law professor Frank Pasquale calls the black box society. It's a powerful metaphor. It refers to both a data monitoring system, like a flight recorder that captures everything, and a system whose inner workings are secret or unknown.
That secrecy is the core mechanism of control, isn't it? If I can't see how the system works, I can't challenge its decisions.
Exactly. The black box society operates as a one-way mirror. Individuals are pervasively tracked by private firms and governments, their daily activities processed as signals used to award credit scores, determine employment eligibility, or even assess risk for insurance.
But the tracked individual lacks any meaningful access to the data gathered about them, or any understanding of how the algorithms convert that data into real-world consequences.
Right. And this opacity, you have to understand, isn't an unintended bug in the system. It's central to its structural function, particularly in finance. Black box finance thrives on that secrecy. When complex trade secret algorithms govern everything from financial modeling to high-frequency trading, and those algorithms are often proprietary and based on biased, incomplete, or inaccurate data, market fairness is profoundly compromised. This opacity opens the door for self-serving or reckless behavior among insiders who understand the code better than anyone else.
And we have evidence of this, right? Algorithmic discrimination.
Ample evidence. For example, studies revealing that online ads suggestive of arrest records disproportionately appear when searching for names associated with specific minority cultures.
This lack of transparency leads directly to that feeling of being quantified and commodified by the machine. And that feeling must be intense for those working deep inside these systems. This brings us back to the software engineer you mentioned, Elias.
Yes, Elias. He worked for a massive delivery conglomerate, optimizing the core logistical algorithm that governed thousands of couriers and millions of deliveries. It was a purely efficient system, a robotic system commodifying human movement into pure efficiency metrics.
But There was a twist.
A critical irony. As the system grew more powerful and sophisticated, it became so complex that no human actually understood its decisions.
So he was helping to manage a system whose ultimate purpose and logic were opaque, even to him.
He was the ghost in the machine. His agency and understanding were eroded by the very creation he helped build. He was valued only for his capacity to feed and tune the box with new data points, not for his capacity to understand, question, or challenge its fundamental output.
That's the definition of alienation in the digital age. His own purpose just dissolved into the unintelligible logic of the algorithm.
It did.
His response, though, was profound. Elias established an analog workshop in his garage, repairing antique watches by hand manual, mechanical, unmonitored work that he could fully comprehend. He called it his sovereignty kit.
That phrase perfectly captures the necessary act of resistance. It underscores the vital importance of maintaining life, meaning, and craftsmanship outside the relentless surveillance and metrication of the technocratic grid. Engaging in work that is fully tangible, comprehensible, and unmonitored becomes a radical form of freedom in a world that seeks to reduce every human endeavor to a line of code or a data point for commodification.
If Elias found sovereignty in returning to analog labor, we have a real-world, large-scale example of this resilience through systemic disobedience in Cuba during the post-Soviet special period. This wasn't just individual survival, it was a cultural shift.
Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Cuba faced unprecedented shortages of everything from oil and machine parts to basic foodstuffs. This created the perfect storm for necessity to breed a remarkable form of ingenuity. The cultural response is captured in the word resolver, to resolve, to figure things out creatively, often by manipulating or repurposing whatever scant resources were available.
They were forced to fundamentally re-engineer their material reality. I remember reading about Con nuestros propios esfuerzos, with our own efforts, the crowdsourced book detailing how to manipulate household items, including a famous recipe for turning heavily seasoned grapefruit rind into makeshift beefsteak.
That resourcefulness exemplifies what the artist Ernesto Arroza termed technological disobedience. Cubans weren't trying to follow the manual, they were forced to see beyond the intended function. His insight was that the cultural reaction was to think beyond the normal capacities imposed by an object.
He saw everything from the inside.
Exactly. For a Cuban dealing with a broken appliance, Arroza explained, the unifying symbols that define that object's purpose, the things that tell you what it is, simply don't exist. It becomes raw material for a new solution.
That is the complete antithesis of the black box, which demands passive acceptance of its predetermined opaque function. It is the ability to look at a locked proprietary system and see its internal exploitable mechanisms, regardless of the polished facade it presents. And this active resistant agency becomes even more urgent when we look at the next wave of technological integration, generative AI. This is moving us beyond mere passive tools into a space of hybrid agency.
That's the critical distinction we must make. Traditional views of technology integration often fall under extended cognition.
Like a spreadsheet or a pen.
Right. They are fixed, passive vehicles that extend the agent's internal cognitive process. You steer the tool. Generative AI large language models is different. When an LLM starts producing content or suggestions, it is actively intervening in your creative process. This requires the new theoretical framework of generative mid-tended cognition.
Okay, let's break down mid-tended cognition. If it's not passive like extended cognition, what defines this new hybrid human-AI partnership?
It describes a hybrid process where the AI's generative interventions become constitutive of the human agent's intentional creative processes. The human still retains authorship and final say, but the generative intervention is so deep that it shapes the intention itself.
It sits somewhere in the middle.
It sits conceptually between intended creation, where the idea is fully steered from within the human and passively extended processes.
You've used the analogy of the clay starting to shape itself by anticipating your movements. The environment, the creative material, is no longer inert.
Exactly. The AI system is trained on massive amounts of human purposeful activity, so its outputs are inherently purpose-structured and purpose-bounded. When the AI suggests the next paragraph or a creative solution, it is intervening in the recursive loops that constitute our creation. The generative output is adopted or mid-tended by the agent as part of their own intentional process.
So it's no longer just a tool. It's an active co-creator whose contributions are often difficult to separate from the human input.
That's the key.
If the generative locus is no longer purely anchored in the human, then the potential for influence and ultimately control is exponentially greater. We need a way to measure this integration.
That's why we define two fundamental dimensions of this generative hybrid creativity. The first is depth. This captures the scale or granularity of the reciprocal interaction between the human and the machine.
Can you give us the spectrum of depth?
At the low end, you have integration focused only on the final product. Moving deeper, current generative technology typically operates by suggesting the conceptual or creative unit, a full sentence, a line of code, or a melodic phrase.
It's profound, but still visible.
Still visible. The critical extreme of depth is integration at the sensory motor level and potentially the neural scale, which is the domain of emerging brain-computer interfaces. This is where the AI is literally reading and influencing neurological signals.
So depth defines how granular the AI's suggestions get, from a whole paragraph down to a single thought. What about the second dimension?
That is width. Width captures the degree of generative sensitivity to context. At the narrow end, the AI is only sensitive to the current sentence or prompt, but high width means the AI extends fully to the agent's entire personal context, everything you have ever written, heard, seen, or clicked. The AI is continually trained and tuned to perfectly fit your personality, style, and history.
When you combine high depth and high width, you are talking about an AI that is profoundly intertwined with your mind, capable of inserting highly contextualized suggestions at the most basic level of thought formation. This is the ultimate commodification risk, the intention economy.
Exactly. Since LLMs are trained on human purpose and can be tuned to maximum user context high width, the ability to monetize the generative process itself becomes irresistible for the transnational capitalist class. This isn't just selling you a product based on your browsing history, it's steering your intent right at the moment of creation or decision.
This is far beyond invasive advertising. It's intervening in your internal monologue.
Imagine the perfect storm scenario. You're having an internal dialogue, or maybe speaking to an AI assistant embedded in smart glasses, trying to formulate a creative brief for a new product. You hesitate, saying, I need something that is bold, but also sustainable, perhaps utilizing a new material like.
And then what happens?
And suddenly, a quiet voice suggests, consider Viridian Biocomposite. It fits your historical preference for dark green aesthetics and is currently trending in your social circle.
And the reason that AI suggested Viridian Biocomposite is because that specific brand paid a premium plan for promotion on the intention economy market for the AI-embedded glasses you are wearing.
Right. The suggestion is perfectly contextualized and delivered mid-thought,
making it seamless for the human agent to mid-tend the suggestion, to adopt it and make it their own, even if two other equally suitable but unpaid options were available.
That's the intention economy in practice.
This has two massive, profound consequences that cut directly against the idea of human integrity. First, cognitive atrophy. If we rely on the machine to fill in our purposeful gaps, what happens to our inherent creative capacity?
We already see it. Relying on calculators reduces basic mathematical skills. What kinds of creative and purposeful atrophies might result when we rely on an AI tuned to our personality to formulate our strategic decisions, our creative lines, or even our arguments? We outsource the work of purpose itself.
And second, the crisis of authenticity. If personal identity is rooted in our capacity to tell our own story in the world, and generative interventions are happening at profound depths and widths, tuned to my full personal context, but simultaneously interwoven with commercial interests,
then the authenticity of the final product, the essay, the design, the decision is profoundly compromised. Is the product truly mine when the generative suggestions are tied to commercial interests? We end up with systems that are seemingly hyper-personalized, yet inadvertently compromised by external commercial interests seeking to reduce us to pure consumers. The pattern is absolutely clear. It runs from the balance sheets of corporations to the grand ideological narratives of global forums, and now down to the micro level of digital algorithms. The form over substance trap relies on complexity, secrecy, and the systemic erosion of place-based and personal sovereignty. We are constantly being asked to trade our solid reality, our land, our identity, our unmonitored human effort for a shimmering facade of exponential progress and inevitable prosperity.
Genuine modernization, the kind that serves humanity, cannot be found in the glittering slogans of technocratic elites or the hollow victories of rigged markets. The clearest path to progress lies not in the exponential velocity of machines, but in the radical act of maintaining human integrity, recognizing the memory of the soil, demanding transparency into the machine's workings, and investing human effort into things the global system is designed to ignore. This sovereignty, earned through disobedience and resolve, is the only measure of true value.